billions upon billions of dollars. Who even thinks about building a walking printer? Technology companies that do well by doing good. They're destroying, we're building. They've spent the last 80 years trying to destroy a country. Welcome back to From Tech to Tanks. We've focused heavily over the past couple of months since we started the show on the tanks part, not so much on the tech part. So let's talk a little bit about tech as it pertains to the Israeli tech ecosystem, because what happens in Israel when it comes to innovation, I would say it's borderline miraculous, but at the very least, it's incredible. It's truly spectacular. So let's just jump in. Before we start, important kind of disclaimer, Israel is a country, as you may or may not know, smaller than New Jersey. All right, we got 9 million people here. It's, I guess you could say, in the worst neighborhood on earth. We are surrounded, as you know, by enemies who want our destruction. And so, we have every excuse in the book to just survive, to just exist and not change the world. But that is far from what we see in Israel. So let's just jump in and I'll give you some information that may or may not blow your mind. So let's start with the different ways that one can analyze an ecosystem, right? If you look at a place like Silicon Valley, Tel Aviv, or other places, how do you examine, how do you dissect the ecosystem and determine its strength? So let's start with capital. Someone just posted a meme on Facebook that said, "Where is the capital of Palestine?" And they said, "In Iranian banks." So, every year investors deploy capital in Israel. And of course, many reports are written as far as how much capital is invested. And I'm going to give you just one statistic to just give you a clear understanding of how, again, miraculous the Israeli tech ecosystem is. In 2021, there were $11 billion invested in Israeli startups. Now, everything I'm going to say, again, put in the perspective of a country smaller than New Jersey in the most unstable region on planet Earth. $11 billion invested in Israeli startups in 2021. That is a staggering number. Just objectively speaking, that is a staggering number. 1 year later, from 2021 to 2022, you went from $11 billion, sit down for this, not to 12, not to 13, not to 14, from $11 billion in 2021 to $26 billion in 2022. That's right. 2021, 11, 2022, 26. That's a wild jump, a wild leap. But ever since then, we see those numbers increasing and continuing to break records. Even in 2024, when we were fighting an existential war, we broke records in large rounds, and that's an important distinction. It's not the overall amount invested in Israel. Again, we're fighting an existential war, but when you look at the mega rounds, the big checks, the $50, $100 million checks, Israel again broke records, which is a very important point. And I want to stick on that for 1 second, because as you probably heard, there is a book called Startup Nation, which explains how Israel, again, this tiny little country, leads the world in startups, right? Entrepreneurs per capita, et cetera, et cetera. That was the case when the book was written. Today, I feel like we've graduated from Startup Nation to something a little bit more mature, a little bigger. Call it, Scale Up Nation, call it Unicorn Nation, call it whatever you want. The reality is that Israeli entrepreneurs and Israeli investors are not looking to build multi-million or even multi-billion dollar companies, yes, but we're talking about building world-leading, sustainable businesses, not early-stage startups that then we flip to Google or to Apple or Facebook or Microsoft, which is something that we saw over the years, and many investors, I would say, in Silicon Valley and in other places had a problem with, because as I've been told by Mark Andreessen, probably the best tech investor in the world, Israel sells too early, meaning we don't let companies mature. For example, Waze, at the time, was acquired by Google for $1 billion, and everyone was like freaking out, $1 billion. Had they waited, had they let the company mature even more, it'd probably be worth 50 times that today. So traditionally, Israeli companies did sell too early. And that's why we were called Startup Nation. We built startups and then we flipped those startups. Today, that is no longer the case. Today, we're building large businesses, multi-billion dollar businesses. In fact, Israeli startups or Israeli companies are now acquiring other Israeli companies. So we've matured. And a way to look at that is, to I would say quantify that, are the big rounds of financing. We're not raising the $5 million checks anymore. It's large monster rounds. So that's as far as the capital that's flowing into Israel, billions upon billions of dollars. But where's that money coming from? And let me explain that question. In the tech world and in many other industries, there's something called, let's call it dumb money and strategic money, or dumb money and smart money. What is dumb money? What is smart money? Dumb money, maybe it's not a great way to describe it, is money coming from non-strategic investors, whether it's a dentist that has some extra capital or a doctor or a lawyer, but not somebody that can help the company grow. They write a check and they say, do your thing. That's quote unquote dumb money. Again, let's not call it that. Let's call it non-strategic investors. And then there's smart money, strategic money, which is money coming from institutional investors like Mark Andreessen Horowitz, and other, VC funds that deploy capital, and that's only the beginning of the process, because then they help the company, they make introductions to other companies, they help with business development, they help with further rounds of financing, strategic money. So where's this money coming from when we talk about billions of dollars flowing into Israel? And the answer is everywhere. What do I mean when I say everywhere? Of course, there are non-strategic investors deploying in Israel, of course, but it is a pretty accurate statement to say that every single leading venture capital firm in the world has set up some sort of shop in Israel. Many of them, Battery, Bessemer, Accel, Lightspeed, Sequoia, Benchmark, etc., have official offices in Israel, right? But then there are funds like Andreessen Horowitz that have one office in Silicon Valley. And he told me, Mark Andreessen personally told me, you can read this interview online, that when they open their second office, it's going to be in Tel Aviv. But even now, when they don't have a second office, they have someone on the ground, and they've made many investments in Israel, many. So even Andreessen Horowitz that's not in Israel is really in Israel. So the money that's flowing into Israel isn't just money, it's strategic money at the highest levels. It's the world's leading tech investors deploying capital in Israel, not in LA, not in New York, and they're setting up offices, again, in Tel Aviv, not in any of these other ecosystem, which is pretty telling, when it comes to the strength of Israeli tech. So the money's flowing like water, and the money that's coming is strategic money. So that's capital, and that's one way to look at an ecosystem, and that's a great metric. But then let's talk about success stories, right? I mean, they're investing in Israel. What are they making on their investment? What return are they making? I mean, is Israel generating success stories? And the answer is, of course, yes. And how do you measure success? Well, there are two ways to measure success. There are private companies owned by an entrepreneur, part of which is owned by their investors. Then there are public companies, which is on the stock market. People can buy stock. It's owned by the public, right? So when it comes to private companies, there's a term that was coined many years ago and probably needs an update, and that is the term unicorn. What's a unicorn in tech? It's a billion-dollar private company. Meaning a private company that's valued at $1 billion. That doesn't mean they're making $1 billion. Their revenue, is tied to their valuation. But the valuation of the company, meaning the investors that are investing at $1 billion valuation. In other words, just hypothetically speaking, if an investor invests $500 million, right, it's half of $1 billion, they own 50% of the company. So the company's worth $1 billion. So how many unicorns does Israel have? How many private billion-dollar companies does Israel have? Well, first of all, we have to define what an Israeli company is. Is an Israeli company a company that's based in Israel, or a company that has all of its people in Israel, or a company that was founded by an Israeli founder, or a company that started in Israel and now scaled globally? There are different definitions of that, but no matter how you look at it, the number of unicorns that Israel has is absolutely mind-blowing. First of all, Israel has more unicorns than the entire European Union. I mean, just wrap your head around that for a second. But also, I heard recently that 10% of the entire world's unicorns, the entire world, every unicorn on the planet, Israel has 1/10 of all of them. Which, again, guys, remember, New Jersey, worst neighborhood on earth, 1/10 of the world's unicorns. That makes no sense. I mean, none of what I'm saying makes any sense. It's crazy to think about, but that's the reality. So that's on the private side. On the public side, you have Israeli companies, many, many, many public companies, many of which you've heard of, whether it's Wix and Fiverr and Lemonade and so many others. When you look at public companies, the country with the most companies on Wall Street is, of course, the United States of America, right? 350 million people. Then number 2 is China, 1.5 billion people. Number 3 is Israel, 9 million people. So I'm going to repeat that. The country with the most companies on Wall Street is the United States of America with 350 million people. Number 2 is China with 1.5 billion people. Number 3 is Israel with 9 million people. I mean, it makes no sense. I'm going to keep saying that. I know I sound like a broken record, but it makes no sense. So when you look at public companies, Israeli public companies, not only are they plentiful, there's so many of them, but some of them are incredible investments. Lemonade is a great example. If you're not familiar with Lemonade, I would say they did to insurance what Uber did to transportation, or what Meta did to communication, which is they took an industry that always existed, right? I mean, insurance existed. No one likes their insurance company, and they disrupted it using technology, and for lack of a better way to explain it, they made insurance sexy again. I had the opportunity to meet with the founders, both incredible people, before the app was even on the App Store. Shai Winiger, the co-founder of the company, showed it to me right away. I opened it. I remember looking at it and being like, this is not an insurance app, because it's a beautiful app. It's the opposite of everything you would think about when you think about an insurance company. Anyway, they're a public company right now. I'm not giving out any investment advice because I don't invest in the markets, but I will tell you that when you look at their stock, it's quite clear that this is a company worth investing in. So that's on the public side. Okay, great. What about what drives all this innovation? At the end of the day, what drives all of this tech, all of this, out of the box thinking? The answer is creativity. The answer is really out of the box thinking. How creative are Israeli startups? They speak about out of the box. Israeli entrepreneurs have no box. They shattered the box because when I say they, Israeli entrepreneurs, some of them have thought of ideas that it's like, how did they even come up with that idea? And I'll give you just one example. I mean, there are hundreds, but I'll just give you one example. If you think about, and it doesn't matter who you are, where you are in the world, if you think about the devices that you use pretty much on a regular basis, you have, your phone in your pocket, which is a supercomputer. You have, your desktop, if you use a desktop, which fundamentally changed over the last decade. You have your laptops that are like paper thin, all of these amazing devices. But then there's one device that you use, and I don't know who you are, but you use it and you hate it. You hate it. Everyone hates it. And the answer is the printer, right? No one likes their printer. It's like, is it going to work this time? Is it not going to work this time? Why do printers stink so bad? Think about it. Why have printers not been disrupted? Why are printers not this big? The answer is, obviously, you need to put a paper into the printer. So there's not much wiggle room in terms of size, right? You need it to be the size of a piece of paper. Well, that's how normal people think. That's how you and I think. Comes along an Israeli entrepreneur named Tuvia, Jerusalem-based entrepreneur, and says, wait a second. Why do you even need to put the paper into the printer in the first place? And you think to yourself, well, how else are you going to print on a piece of paper? Comes along Tuvia and says, I'm going to do something a little different. And this guy, and sit down for this because this is going to blow your mind, built a company called Zuta Labs, Z-U-T-A Labs. And what he built is a mobile robotic printer that's this big. How does it print? Well, you put it on the paper and it walks on the paper and prints. That's right. A walking printer that walks on the paper and prints. Now, it's not meant to replace commercial printers that, print, I don't even know how many pages a minute. This is mobile printing. So if you're in your car and your bank needs something, needs a form, whatever, you print it and it's this big. So that's the kind of creativity that Israeli entrepreneurs have. Just completely shatter the box. Who even thinks about building a walking printer? That's what I'm talking about. So that's out of the box thinking. What else is there? Let's look at the multinationals, aka the tech corporations of the world, the Amazons, right? The Googles, the Facebooks, the Apples. The answer, again, is that every single one of those companies, basically without exception, are not only in Israel and not only building core elements of their portfolio in Israel, but they're doubling down on Israel, despite the war. Look at Nvidia. I mean, if you look at the top 5 most valuable companies in the world, or at least the most valuable tech companies in the world, you have Nvidia, you have Apple, you have Microsoft, you have Google, and you have Meta, right? All of those, again, are not only in Israel, not only have multiple offices in Israel, but are doubling down on Israel. And the best example of that is Nvidia. I mean, Nvidia are more Zionist than I am, right? So, you look at these companies, take Apple, just as an example. When you unlock your iPhone, right? Face ID. Who developed Face ID? Who invented Face ID? The answer is, of course, an Israeli company called PrimeSense, and Apple acquired them, right? When you use Android, when you use Google and you Google something, you make a typo. Google says, did you mean this? Right? That's built in Israel. When you use Microsoft Teams and use all the AI features built into Microsoft Teams, that's built in Herzliya. The chip of the iPhone, built in Herzliya. And the list just goes on. There is basically no such thing as a leading tech corporation that has not set up shop in Israel. And again, not only are they here, but they're building products that you and I use on a daily basis here in Israel. That includes, by the way, not only the cool new kids on the block, like the Apples and the Googles, but also the old school leading tech corporations like Intel and IBM. They're also in Israel. They're also doubling down in Israel. And Intel's a perfect example. They acquired multiple companies in Israel for billions of dollars. Billions, of course, including Mobileye, but others as well. By the way, when it comes to acquisitions, Google's largest acquisition in its history was an Israeli startup, or an Israeli company, can't call them a startup, called Wiz, which, open parentheses, it's kind of funny that Israel has Wiz, Waze, and Wix, but topic for another time, naming conventions of startups. But either way, when you look at all of the leading tech corporations, they're all in Israel and they're doubling down on Israel, which is, again, incredible and I would say even illogical. But here's the thing. All of what we've said till now is impressive. No doubt it's impressive, it's incredible. But we like to call ourselves a light unto the nations. What does that mean? It means that we are changing the world. or making the world a better place. Now, with all due respect to Apple building their iPhone here and Google building, search here and all of those things, which again are very impressive, does that make us a light unto the nations? Not really. So what does? What makes us a light unto the nations as it pertains to technology? And the answer is what's called impact tech. What's impact tech? It's technology, and I want to emphasize technology, not nonprofits. Technology companies that do well by doing good, meaning they're businesses that use their technology to make the world a better place. Now, the list of companies in Israel that fall under this category, the list is quite literally endless. But let's just give a few examples, because to me, the punchline of everything is the impact, is what Israel's doing to make the world a better place. So take cancer research, just as an example. Israel leads the world. I mean, if you look at the top 20, treatments and cures of cancer, I would say probably 95% of them are developed in Israel. I'll just give you one example among literally hundreds. There's a company called Mobile ODT, founded by an American-Israeli entrepreneur named Ariel Be'eri, who said, wait a second, there are types of cancer like pancreatic cancer, which are basically death sentences. Yes, some people, detect it early and somehow beat it, but it's not good. Ovarian cancer, not good. But then there's types of cancers that are curable. Cervical cancer, highly curable. So then you ask yourself, well, why are people dying of cervical cancer? And the answer is because the test is extremely invasive and people don't get tested because they're afraid of the test. Ariel Be'eri says to himself, that is unacceptable. I can't cure pancreatic, but if there's a cancer that's curable and treatable, why aren't we treating it? Because people are afraid to go get tested? Unacceptable. So he built this company called Mobile ODT that uses cutting edge, bleeding edge light technology that you shine on the patient, and it works with an iPhone or an Android phone, and there's no physical contact, and it detects cervical cancer. They're deploying the solution to thousands of hospitals around the world. They've probably saved billions of lives by now, millions. So that's just one example, cancer research. But the list just goes on and on. I'll give you one more example because this is incredible. And I highly recommend after you finish watching this to go open YouTube and search for the words Innovation Africa. So a good friend of mine named Sivanya Ari, who's a French immigrant to Israel, amazing woman, she looked at Africa and she said, in Tel Aviv, we have solar panels on every roof, right? We have broadband technology, fast internet, and yet in Africa, in these remote villages, they don't have running water. And again, you and I know that. Have we done anything about it? No. Sivan says unacceptable. So she built this organization. It is a nonprofit, but uses technology to build the infrastructure for running water in remote villages in Africa. And the reason I told you to go YouTube it afterwards is because you watch this video of these African children in their villages playing with the running water and thanking their brothers and sisters in Israel. They have never seen running water before. This is the type of thing that Israel does that makes it a light unto the nations. And that's just two examples. When it comes to impact, when it comes to making the world a better place, Israel absolutely dominates the world of technology. And the list is very, very long. So really just to sum up, we're talking about an ecosystem in a country that is absolutely tiny, microscopic on the map, and again, has every excuse in the world to just exist. But that is not what we see. We see Israel innovating, continuing to innovate, continuing to break records. And in addition to the record that I mentioned before of large rounds of financing in 2024, we also broke records in M&A, mergers and acquisitions, aka companies buying Israeli companies. Again, we broke records despite the war, which I guess reminds me of a nice verse in the Bible, in the Torah, that says something extremely counterintuitive. And I love quoting it because it is so spot on. And that is when the Israelites, and I call them Israelites, not Jews, because we weren't Jews yet, we didn't get the Torah yet at Mount Sinai, we were Israelites, we were slaves in Egypt, and the Torah says something that, again, makes no sense, and that is, it says, I'll say it in Hebrew, then I'll translate, the more the Egyptians persecuted or tortured the Israelites, the more they multiplied the Israelites, and the more they flourished. The more they persecuted us, the more we thrived, the more we flourished. Well, that doesn't make any sense. You would think the more we're persecuted, the more they lower and shove us into the ground, and we can't innovate, we can't reproduce, and we can't flourish. But that is not our story. The more they persecute, the more we flourish. The more they terrorize us, the more we innovate. And this is not some abstract statement. Look at the data. The more terrorist attacks Israel endures, the more our enemies attack us, the more we innovate. And the perfect example of that is this war. 50% of this country is in reserves. Literally half of the companies that I mentioned are not even working because they're in reserves. And despite that, ask any investor that has deployed capital in Israel, Israel continues to exceed expectations and over-deliver. right? They're persecuting, they're terrorizing, they're killing, they're destroying, we're building. That is our story, and that continues to be our story. So just to summarize, no matter how you want to look at this ecosystem, whether it's capital, whether it's innovation, out-of-the-box thinking, whether it's multinationals, whether it's VCs and tech investors who set up shop in Israel, and whether it's impact or any other metric you want to look at, make up a metric. Go do the research. Israel leads the way, leads the world. Maybe we're not number one, but we are absolutely number two after Silicon Valley, which is absolutely mind-blowing. So what does this mean to everyone who's watching? It means one thing. Good luck boycotting Israel. And we've all seen the memes, but the bottom line is, whoever you are, wherever you are in the world, you cannot boycott us. You just can't. You know why? Because you can't unlock your iPhone in the morning. You can't water your garden because drip irrigation was invented in the Technion in Haifa. Okay? You can't take a picture with your phone because dual lens technology on phones was invented by an Israeli. Okay? The list just goes on. You can't do anything. You can't navigate to work because Waze is Israeli. You can't use Google because Google's acquiring Israeli companies left and right. The list goes on and on and on. You cannot boycott Israel and live a day in the modern world. It's just impossible. So that is why we, as Israelis, look at these BDS folks, promoting the boycott and divestment from Israel and using Wix websites to do so. It's hilarious. The reality is Israel leads the world, shows no signs of slowing down, and I got to say, on a personal level, I feel very blessed and privileged to meet some of the most incredible, most brilliant people in the world. And I'll just end with one last thing, and that is, when the founder of Apple, the man who invented personal computing, Steve Wozniak, visited Israel, and you could watch this on YouTube, I had the opportunity to sit with him. And I asked him, and he said, Israel, from his perspective, is incredibly exciting, and he watches what's happening, and it blows his mind. He said this on video. You can go watch it. So, when the founder of Apple and the man who invented personal computing says that about Israel, you know that Israel is something unique and spectacular. And again, no signs of slowing down. Let's take some questions. So the question was, besides tech, are there other industries that are exciting? And the answer is, tech is a very kind of wide umbrella because many, many industries fall under tech. For example, agriculture, right? When you think of agriculture and farmers, the last thing you think about is tech. But the reality is there's an entire industry called AgTech, agriculture tech. And I'll give you just one example. And this is a mind-blowing company called C-Tree, like I see the tree. What do? They use drone technology to basically examine and diagnose crop. Why? Because there's a certain type of disease, for lack of a better term, that's basically like a cancer, which means that if one tree is infected, it spreads throughout the crop, which means people lose their entire livelihood. And the way that farmers basically diagnose this is they use ladders. They climb up and look at trees, which is clearly quite ridiculous. So these guys use drone technology to diagnose trees. So AgTech is a very exciting industry in Israel. It falls under tech. There's music tech. There's food tech. I mean, some of the leading alternative meat products in the world are in Israel. Many, many, many examples of that. Music tech and, the list just goes on. Basically any industry, transportation, communication, any industry that you think about, insurance, falls under the umbrella of tech. So, are there other industries that are exciting? Sure, there are a lot of things that are exciting in Israel, but when it comes to leading the world, I would say technology is by far the most exciting, the most promising industry in Israel. But again, that manifests across the board in many different industries. So the next question is about the conflict, and that is, if we do one day have peace with our neighbors, can they build a technology ecosystem? Can they build a strong economy? And if so, in what industry? And the answer, I would say, as it stands right now, unequivocally no. Why? Because the reason Israel is so successful, and the reason Israel looks the way it looks, is because we've spent the last 80 years building an incredible country. And the reason our enemies, whether it's Gaza or towns, Arab towns in Judea and Samaria, the reason they look the way they look is because they've spent the last 80 years trying to destroy a country and failed. So when your entire culture and your education system and everything that you believe in and your charter and your philosophy is to destroy and to murder and to kill, you can't build innovation. Now, nothing would make me happier than one day achieving peace with our neighbors and them building, a copy-paste, maybe an Alibaba version of it, but a copy-paste of Israeli tech. Nothing would make me happier. But that's a little bit of a fairy tale. Again, as it stands right now, things might change. I don't believe they will, because radical Islam doesn't understand the concept of moving forward and advancing and building a good society, but it could be. Anything's possible. In fact, I would go even further and say that if there's ever a chance of peace, I actually think technology will maybe be that bridge, because there are quite a few programs in Israel, accelerators, incubators, that hire Jewish/Israeli founders if their co-founder is Arab. And that's an interesting take on it, but I think if there's ever a chance for peace, it will be tech, which is a consensus, that will bring that peace. But if that happens, can the Palestinians, quote unquote, build a strong, promising technology ecosystem? I can't really picture that happening, if I'm being totally honest.